All right, everybody. We've got a man who's going to talk to us about Draft.js under the hood. This should be exciting, so I'll leave it to me.
Thanks, guys. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about this thing called Draft.js. Just a quick show of hands. Who's actually seen or heard of Draft.js? A couple of guys. And who's actually worked with it? Okay, cool. All right, so who's never heard of Draft.js? Okay, the majority. Okay, that's cool. All right, so let's start off with what Draft.js is, okay? So if you haven't heard about it before, that's fine. I'm going to get you up to speed very quickly. Okay, a lot to talk about, but this is the journey that I went on very recently with Draft.js. So the first thing that you have to ask yourself is, what is this thing called Draft.js? Well, Draft.js is a framework. It's not just a control, it's a framework for building rich text editors in React. Okay, powered by a mutable model. Okay, the whole JavaScript community is going towards this immutable stuff with the functional programming, and this has got that, it's sort of baked into it. Okay, and it's cross-browser. Okay, which is pretty cool. So it's a text editor, like rich text input. Okay, but it's a bit more than that. So the question is, why do we need another one? Okay, there are ones that are out there already. Now, let's just have a look at that for a second. Okay, there's lots of things that will actually allow you to write rich text out there. There's jQuery plugins and there's all sorts of different ones. But if you have a look at most of them are actually taking a normal text box and interlacing, or basically overwriting HTML on top of that. Okay, now that works, but it's hacky. And the minute you start getting different browser resolutions or different iPhones or different mobile devices, things start to basically go out of whack and break and stuff like that. So it becomes very difficult. Okay, now a long time ago, some of the browsers tried to actually resolve this problem with something called ContentEditable. Okay, ContentEditable is very simply just a attribute that you give to your div. Okay, it's called ContentEditable. So what happened was the standard said, all right, what we want you to do is we want you to go out and then we want you to be able to create this div that will allow you to actually edit HTML pages. And all the vendors went, okay, cool, let's go ahead and do that. So Chrome went along and they said, all right, how are we going to implement this thing? All right, let's have a look. So what we're going to do is we're going to basically go ahead and we say this is the some text. And you can see over here, just see if I can move that out the way. You got it, okay, sorry about that. It actually creates divs, okay? I've got this click to toggle coming up there, which is a bit of a technical bug, but that's not too bad. All right, now you can see when I hit a break line or when I hit a new line, I get a new div. Well, that's fine. All right, let's have a look and see what happened with Firefox. Okay, so that'll be up next. Okay, so Firefox, I can't even click on it. I actually have to break the HTML or give it a height or basically give it some default text, because otherwise it doesn't actually allow me to render it. So there I go, I managed to get the thing in now. If I have a look at that, I go Firefox, and then I hit the next, oh, look at that, it's BRs, it's break line. Okay, cool. All right, now let's have a look and see what our friend IE does. Okay, so I can say this. Now notice what's happening with the text, right? I've just got the first character for some reason. Then I hit the head, and I get paragraphs. And not only that, right, I only get the entire input once I hit character tone. So, if you're actually trying to create something that's cross-browser and you want to basically put like image overlay or something like that, even if you're using good old jQuery, this becomes a complete and utter headache. It's a nightmare. So this is the reason why Draft.js came to be, right? It's essentially give something that's content editable, that's standardized through everything, okay? So Draft.js makes content editable consistent. Okay, so I'm going to give you a little bit of a demonstration of something that myself and my team, which I'm very proud to have here today, have actually been working on over the last little while. Okay. All right. So now obviously this is just a shorter version. I'm not going to show you sort of, we're writing this for various different clients, and obviously in the real world this have lots more Chrome around it with lots more titles and stuff like that. But it's essentially a text editor. I can go ahead and type some text in here. And then if I do something like this, I can say at, All right, I want to see Shiri, and I can go ahead and basically check, select one of these people. I can then mouse over it. Gives me telephone numbers, job titles. I can then say, all right, I want to basically have a hashtag, so I can have hash, let's go TST, and if I don't have that, I can essentially carry on writing. It'll actually just add that hashtag for me. And also I can go something like http:// let's go Google, and it automatically recognizes that it's actually a link, and will render it as such. Okay, so this is what it would look like when it's editable. If we go ahead and post that, then essentially you can see that this is what it looks like when it's rendered. But other people have done some pretty interesting stuff with it, okay? And there's one of the two of them that I'd really like to actually share with you very quickly, which I find phenomenal. So let's have a look at one of these. And there was a time in my life where I was actually looking for a project I would have actually killed for something like this. Okay, so this is just a text editor, where I can basically start typing some text in here. I can then go ahead and highlight something, and I can say, all right, that's actually a link. Give it google.com. Okay, let's scroll down a bit here, put some more text in, highlight that, go underlined, bold, whatever. Okay, then we can go ahead and grab a YouTube video. And there it is. And you can do things like resizable divs. I can imagine this doesn't have to be just a resizable div. It could be anything, the map or whatever, And then a table where I can go ahead and start adding rows, start adding columns. So you can get the point that this thing is awfully powerful, and it gives you a good use case for any place where you could actually use this sort of rich text editing. So, the sky's the limit. What do you want to do? Emojis, everybody loves emojis, whatever, it's all good. So these are some of the use cases that you can utilize. Another one, which has become pretty popular of late, and something that I'd just like to sort of mention as well, is the Draft.js plugins. So one of the problems with Draft.js is that, as you'll see very shortly, right, is that the documentation is a little bit light at the moment, and the API goes very deep. So, there's a little bit of a gap there, which I'm hoping to actually help fulfill somewhat. But these guys gone out and they've created a whole bunch of different types of plugins, okay, that do all sorts of things. So, here's their version of an at mention. Yeah. Then they've got things like Linkify, which you saw something early on. Stickers. Let's go ahead and try one of these guys out. So I can sit here and I can start typing, and then I can go ahead and press this button, and then I can have a sticker. Okay, everybody loves unicorns. I was thinking of using guinea pigs, but whatever. Emojis. Yeah. And it's not just always fun. Sometimes you also need things like a little bit more serious. So alignment. Here I've got an alignment, so I can essentially select that, and I can say I want it in the center, I want it on the left, I want it on the right. So lots of use cases for lots of great applications. Okay. Now just a little bit of a side note, right? We actually started using these plugins. Okay, and I'm definitely going to keep an eye on them because I think there's a lot of value in them. But what actually happened with us is we found out that they didn't work so well on older browsers, and unfortunately we're required to support IE and some of its old legacy habits. So unfortunately we had to actually pull away from the plugins and actually start using our own, which is when I actually started doing kind of a deep dive and a lot of homework on how the Draft.js plugin API works. Okay, and this is how I'm actually here to talk to you about it tonight. So we've had a look at some of the demos. Okay, we have a look at some of the links. So let's get started with what this actually is all about. Okay, this is essentially, so you've seen what it can do. All right, let's see how we can actually do it. So this is Draft.js under the hood. Okay. It's sort of my idea of how I put the actual model together. And I just want to talk about some of the high-level stuff very quickly. So the top one is editor state, okay? And editor state you're going to see time and time again, all right? And that controls, that's your container for everything, okay? And then you've got, underneath that, you've got something called a content state, and that holds things like your actual text, okay? It also holds things like entities, which is metadata that you can put along with your actual text. I'm going to be referring to this a bit later, so if you get a bit lost, just bear with me and we'll cover this in greater detail just now. Selection states helps you basically control everything with regards to where the cursor is, what's selected. Okay, then decorators and inline styles is a little bit more advanced, and we'll get to that when we look at some of the samples. But essentially with decorators, you can do anything, right? The editor becomes your canvas to do anything. All right, so what actually happened was I was looking around for some ways to present this thing, all right, or present the actual API. And I really couldn't find anything out there. So essentially what I did was I decided to sort of generate my own. So what I've done is I've actually created this GitHub repo, okay? And it's essentially an application with some samples of how the APIs work, all right? So if you go there, all right, you can look at the, you can visit the website, and that'll basically bring you to, not that guy, not that guy, not that guy, that guy. Okay, so I've got it zoomed in a little bit because I just want to make sure everybody can read it from the back, okay? And this is essentially what the website looks like. So what I'd like you to do is, have a look at this website, go online, and love it, hate it. But whatever you do, if you don't like something, put in a pull request, help me out, okay? Because this is something which I think has a lot of potential value. So over here, I essentially go through what the Draft.js editor is, and there I've got the definitions for the various different things that we're covering, okay? So, we've got editor state, content blocks, and so on and so forth. Let's go ahead and actually just dive straight into it, shall we? So this is essentially the simplest thing that we could do. We could essentially create a basic Draft.js constructor. Over here, I talk about various different things, but let's go back down to here. All right. Now, I'm a TypeScript guy, so if you have a look and you don't know what these little sort of funny squiggly things at the top over here are, don't worry about them. You can always strip them out if you don't like them, but if you like TypeScript, like I do, then they're very handy. All right. So when we're talking about Draft.js components, we're talking about controlled components. Now, in the React world, you've got controlled components and you've got non-controlled or uncontrolled components. When we talk about controlled components, we've got a continuous loop between setting its value, and every single time we change something within the control, we then fire an onChange event where we set the state, which then sets the value. So that's a loop. Okay, and if you are new to React, and everybody who's ever done a hello world for the first time using a text input gets caught out. Why is my text box not rendering? That's why, because it's a controlled component, you have to continuously go through this loop. So over here you can see the two things that are very interesting. The first one is editor state, and the other one is onChange. So with a text box, you would have something like text, right, or value, which is a string. And with an editor control, you simply have editor state, which is something you're continuously doing, that continuous loop between changing and what have you. So if you want to see the actual code, you can right click over here and you can open that in a new tab, and that'll basically be part of that GitHub project. So maybe that's easy to read, but probably not for the guys at the back. So, right, so this is essentially what it does, and that's essentially a very simple Draft.js control. Simple. Right, moving on to the next one. Content state. Now, if you recall, content state, right, was that big block at the bottom over here, right? Let's have a look and see what that actually does and is and how we can control it. So this is the content state, okay? And this is the actual state that it's being rendered at the time, at this very instance. As you can see, it's empty. It's got a couple of things like a key. It's got sort of inline style ranges, entity, data, whatever. But no text here at this point in time. Now, as I move down here, you can see how I can get the content state. Just by the way, right, the content state is immutable, all right? We don't actually ever change the content state. The same with all these objects. What we do is we just generally use functions to create copies of them that are modified copies, and then we set those back to the editor state. So in essence, right, what we can do here is we can say draft.convert to raw, because it's an immutable object, right? We can't just get the object, we have to actually do this convert to raw, which will give us a plain object back. And then we can get the content state, which we got from the editor state, which is that overarching big guy. And then we can get the JSON string straight out of that, or we can get the plain text. So let's have a look at how this works. So if I go the cat sat on the mat. Okay, now, and then I can put some more text in here. So here's your raw text, and over here, you can see these entity blocks. Now, one of the nice things about Draft.js is that it all boils down to just JSON, okay? So what this basically means is that when I actually save this, I can give it back to my backend, and it can recurse through it, and it can actually store it, or it can rip it apart, or it can change it, or it can do whatever it wanted with it. Okay, so it's essentially free-form content that becomes almost structured, which is kind of cool. Okay, so that's essentially how the content state works. It's very simple. But very often when you want to actually start off with one of these things, right, when you create this state, you don't always want to... I'm just going to show you this very quickly. In fact, I'll just show you from the previous one because that's really simple. So if I show you this previous one with a piece of code, you notice that I create this editor state by saying state, editor state.create empty. That's essentially the first thing that happens when this control is invoked, and that gives me an empty editor state. But sometimes I need to put content in there. You know, previous content that was typed in previously, I'm getting that back from my service or from my GraphQL or wherever. Okay, so I need different ways to actually create content. And these are some of the ways that we can do it. We can do it with plain text, all right? We can do it with JSON, and this is essentially the representation of that JSON. It's the same thing. It's a content state. The only difference between this and the thing that you were looking at earlier on is it's got some inline style ranges. So we've got an italic, it gives you the offset, the length of where that starts and ends, okay? And this is the actual text up here. So if I go ahead and actually click on create new raw content, you can see that that essentially comes up. It also supports some basic HTML, which is kind of cool. So if you've got something that is generating HTML, okay, you can then convert it back into this Draft.js control, okay? I'm sure you can think of a couple of use cases where that would be interesting. So to go through the code with that, okay, to create plain text, it's really simple, all right? Draft.content state and create from text, that's it. Okay, then we essentially get a new editor state, and we set the state with that new editor state. Again, just reiterating, we never actually change the editor state. All we do is we use methods to create new editor states, and then we set it. They set the state so that the editor control can pick that up. So first step, let's create some new content. Second step, create a new editor state. Third step, set the state, and then of course the editor control picks it up and uses that. All right, these are the HTML elements that it actually supports out of the box. Now, you'll notice that there's some of them that are not there. And what about your own custom HTML elements? Well, you can train Draft.js to actually utilize those as well with things like decorators, which we'll discuss later. Okay, and then a JSON string, which is pretty straightforward as well. We can go ahead and say convert from raw, and this is going to give us a content state. And then we can create the new editor state from that content. So that's how we can create new editor states that has got predefined information inside it. All right, the next thing is selection state. So selection state is pretty straightforward, right? So as I'm typing over here, you can see that the offset and the focus cursor is essentially telling me where my cursor is. So the offset is where I am. Right, the focus offset is where it begins, or this is where it begins. The offset is where it begins. The focus offset is where it ends. So I can click over here. It tells me 23, and if I select that, it tells me I'm ending at 36. And then I can also go backwards, and it'll indicate that it's backwards. Okay, but also what's really nice over here is I can do something like this. I can say I want to start at 5 or 6, end at let's say 15, and if I set the selection state, it automatically selects that. This is kind of cool for sort of maybe applications like legal documents where you want to sort of point out various different bits of the document, and you can have links that just automatically go there. The guy can then automatically copy it and paste it or whatever. So, you know, some use case for that. Again, this is a deep dive, so we can, this looks a bit horrible in this particular resolution. I'm just worried that if I make it any smaller, the guys at the back won't be able to see it very well. But over here, you can essentially see that I can get the selection state by getting the editor state, editor state.getSelection. Then the offset is essentially selection state.get anchor offset. The get the focus offset gives you the forwards offset, and then is backwards. So it's very straightforward once you actually get sort of to grips with how it actually works. Okay. Again, setting the selection. Right. A similar sort of deal. This is again an immutable object, so you can't actually change it. All right. But what you can do is you can say selection state.merge. Okay, and then give it the start, give it the end. Okay, and then what will happen at that point in time is you've got a new selection state. Then you can create a new editor state by using this convenience method or the static method saying for selection with the existing editor state, all right, and then with the selection, and it gives you a new editor state, and then you can simply go ahead and set the state with the new editor state, and that will change where your selection is. The next one, I'm just going through this very rapidly, yeah, because obviously this is not a full-blown training session, but just want to give you some idea as to what you can do with it. Let's go ahead over here and say the cat sat on the mat. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say the mat is a noun, N-O-U-N-E, okay, and I'm going to create this entity. And then I'm going to say cat is a noun. And I'm going to say sat is a verb. Okay. And over here you can see on the right-hand side, this is the actual content state. The same object we've been looking at before. This is the content state. And it's gone ahead and actually created these mappings inside it. Okay. And over here you can see what these ranges. So the entity ranges, this is the key over here. This is the offset where it starts, this is where it ends, and it maps to these particular editor state blocks over here. So from that, I'm able to retrieve the fact that there is no information over here, but if I go onto cat, I got a noun. If I go into sat, I got a verb. If I go into mat, I've got a noun. So this allows me to, to put information along with my text. Now, what's interesting is if I go ahead over here and just get a whole bunch of text and I say create entity, this whole thing becomes a block. Now, because I said that this thing is immutable, I cannot change that text. In other words, if I do one backspace, the whole thing disappears. However, I've got some options. If I go ahead over here and I say this thing over here is, let's go ahead and say segmented, and I'm going to create an entity on that range, then what that basically means is that that particular piece of metadata exists along all that information, but if I delete one of those pieces, the other pieces still remain. So it defines it by the segments of the word. And the last one is mutable, which means that, and this will be good for things like URLs or whatever, if I go ahead and set that as an entity, I can still go ahead and delete piece by piece or change it. And as I change it, you'll notice that if you have a look at the actual entities and the offsets, it'll actually follow along with it as well. So it's changed. Okay, so this becomes very, very handy, specifically with things like when we look at decorators later, how we can put additional information along with the text. Okay, so that was the entity. All right, now we're going to go into sort of just a bit of a sidetrack. All right, this is okay. So I found out that I was going to talk here, or essentially I asked to talk here, and I thought to myself, how am I going to do this? So this is still a work in progress. I haven't completed all the documentation for this. It's still sort of underway. But rich utils, you can have a look at the source over here if you really want to. But what will happen over here is I can say the cat sat on the mat. And then this is pretty much out of the box. I can say Control U to underline, Control B to make it bold, okay, and Control I to italicize. And of course, Mac guys, it's the same thing. All right, it'll be not Control, it's the other thing. Yeah, whatever. All right, so out of the box, it basically will intercept your keys, okay, and then you can go ahead and do rich text formatting very, very simply. The next one, block functions. Okay, this is also quite easy. Go ahead and put some text in here, put some space in there, put the cursor over here, put a URL in there, insert image, and there it is. Discover a pixel bay for images, yay! So that didn't really work, but in essence, you get the idea that you can basically insert images directly into the thing. And this is done with the helper method, so this is actually just a static class that you get with the draft stuff. Very easy to just inject images or maps or whatever, whatever HTML you want to directly within there. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to talk about is decorators. Okay, now decorators, I want to essentially just crack open the source a little bit, because this guy is really important and very, very powerful. And if you're going to do anything with Draft.js, probably at the end of the day, unless you're doing some really simple stuff, you're probably going to wind up doing some sort of decorator. Okay, so a decorator looks like this. Let's just focus over here. Okay, this thing. Can you guys in the back see? Should I increase the font? Is that okay? Yeah? So I just want you to, there's a lot of code here, but I just want you to focus on this thing over here. This thing called a composite decorator, which you use a static method to actually create. And you pass in an object which essentially has two methods. The one is called a regex strategy, or a strategy, and the other one is a component. Okay? Now, the strategy is how do I locate, or how do I figure out, right, that I need to fire this thing, okay? So if I have a look at this regex strategy, it's really simple, okay? And what this is actually doing is it's looking at the text block that's coming in, it's converting it into text, and then it's saying, all right, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for anything that is, and I'll just give this to you quickly if you're not familiar with regex, that's either a new line or a space followed by a hash, followed by a completed word. That's what that regex says, okay? So it's very simple regex for a hashtag. And then what this thing over here is doing is it's basically doing an execution on that regex. And of course, with the registry expressions, every time you do an execution, it moves the cursor. So it allows me to firstly get the start and the end of each hash, right? And then essentially, it's going to you do a callback for the start and the end of the text where you want to actually, where this registry expression was valid or where you want to actually do it. So that is the strategy. Strategy. How do I actually find what I'm looking for? The next thing is a component, all right? And components are something that you guys are all pretty much familiar with. This is the component, okay? And in this case, it's a really simple little span with a background color, and you always basically pass the child. So let's have a look at how that looks in real life. There it is. So if I'm still typing here, and I say hash, it hasn't picked it up yet, and I say D, there it has. Okay, space, and it's not there again. All right, let's go ahead and put something else in here. Now, because it's registry, or regex, I can come in here and I say, and it's picked it up again. So this is a very simple example of decorator, okay? Now I went ahead and I created another decorator. This is a regex decorator. And what I can do here is I can just basically say sat, or I can say cat, or I can say give me cat, or sat. Okay, so really simple, okay? And of course, source code, if you want to basically figure it out, very similar to the previous one that we looked at. Okay, just to reiterate, or as the guys in computer science like to say, we're going to reiterate again. Okay, you've got a decorator which basically has a strategy, has a component. Over here, this is working slightly differently, and the regex is up here. So I had to use a register expression that looks like this, but it's essentially a very similar type of code. Okay. All right, and then the last thing I'm going to show you is just a complex decorator, all right, which I haven't had a full chance to document, and it's probably going to take me some time to do. But I was thinking about, so everybody's doing sort of hashtags and at mentions, which is fine, but there's got to be more use cases for that sort of thing. I was thinking maybe something like a Coles or a Woolworths, right? They're writing documentation. So how about, right, as they're writing documentation, they can say, oh yeah, I want to look at a stock of, let's say, eggs, and then they can go ahead here, and they can basically select that. Now notice what it did. It essentially took that entire word, overwrote it, and then essentially applied the decorator. So in order to do that, you'd need to be able to first do a selection. So to get the content state, you'd need to be able to do a selection, and then you'd need to be able to overwrite that text and apply the decorator directly within there. And the reason why this works, and the reason why I can actually hover over this and still get that information is because there's an entity along with it as well. So this sort of gives you sort of some of the paradigms that you can do with this sort of things. Okay, and then one more, just for good measure. Good for bread. Now, obviously, this is a work in progress. I got my good friend at the back over here who is an eye candy wizard, and hopefully he can help me maybe make one of these things a little bit prettier. But yeah, this is as far as I've got. There's a couple of things that I'd like to do still. There's a lot of things with regards to key bindings, which are very interesting, and how you can actually control the keyboard. There's things with focus, how you can control the focus, and a couple of other things, sort of bits and bobs that are interesting. So, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to basically just create a platform where if you find something that's cool with Draft.js, or something that you've experienced that you think other people might be able to benefit from, please go ahead, put a pull request in, and let's see what happens with this little project. All right, thanks very much. Question.